Like the mouth of the soil in the earth, breaking through the rocks, growing wild and tall till the buds begin to pop. So pack me in a bowl or roll me in a spliff, or you're breaking me
Buy
down.
magazines, and I do buy High Times because I'm a sucker for weed porn. So throw in a good centerfold of like a nice cola. I'm fucking sold, you know?
Yeah, I can still remember some of the centerfolds, some of the Bud centerfolds from High Times from like 2000, 2001. I used to sit in a Borders bookstore with like a Sports Illustrated on the outside and a High Times on the inside. And be like, yeah, football, right?
That's the way to do it. See, for me, my kind of like High Times memory is one of, like I worked on many different pot farms, and all black market farms are very different. And there was the one like party farm that like a bunch of my friends worked at, and I worked like nearby, but I would go and party there. And it was run by four guys in their 20s who just like loved to party, super down to earth, like just a really good time. They were always cooking for everyone, and their house was like, their trim room was just a living room. The carpet was like disgusting, a million dogs covered in keef and dog hair and trim. Like they didn't even cover the couches with sheets. They're like, whatever, this is a weed house. Like we grow, 6,000 plants. Like obviously there's weed everywhere, but their aesthetic was cutouts from High Times magazine. So their walls was just weed porn. Just weed porn. Every wall was covered. And so just like such a vibe to just walk into this house and there's empty cans and everyone's trimming and hanging out, and then just like delicious nugs on all the walls.
Yes.
Probably
Some of a little sun bleach.
Bodies. Yeah, it was just like all nugs. So yeah, I kind of it's not my current aesthetic, but man, there's nothing like that good nug shot,
Right. Well, before Instagram was such had siloed the cannabis community so hard. My Instagram account only served for the first 5 years or whatever to follow Oregon weed companies, cultivators especially. And so my Instagram for the longest time was nothing but centerfolds. Everybody's like, best, I need to show it work. And it was fantastic. And I surprisingly didn't get that sick of looking at like, I don't know, 10,000 bud shots a day. And
I still don't. I still
yeah,
don't.
right. Sadly, my Instagram feed is like pumpkin spice flavoring and elotes, and I mean it's like food and cocktails because I occasionally I click yes on one of those, and the cannabis stuff is weighted so differently. So sad. I'm gonna have to go and buy High Times if I need my weed porn.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the go-to. See, my Instagram is still completely cannabis for days. At least once a month, I'm like, I need to follow some meme pages or something. Like it's getting to me. But I like your Instagram stories because you're always posting like nice shots of like icy cocktails or like a beautiful little espresso. You got these like other things that you are interested in.
Yeah, trying to show off all of the affordable luxuries, right? And I
Yeah.
got a little sick of my hand holding a joint, but I should probably do more of those too, because I mean, let's be real, that's a lot of my day too.
That's a lot of my day too. But I also work from home, so it's going to be a lot of sitting in the kitchen, sitting on the couch.
I recognize that coffee table. Yeah, it's a lot like, yeah, this is my office. It's also where I hang out and chill at night. So you get a lot of these same images.
Yeah, one bedroom condo life. That's how it goes here.
Hey, for as far as I can tell, you live in like a European, manse. There's a whole lot going on here, and I'm just
Yes,
gonna.
it's my great hall.
Yes, yeah, and
I come to
smoke
think.
floating in the background.
Yeah, no. my my wallpaper. It really is convincing them.
Yeah, don't ruin the illusion by reaching back there and touching it. You should just blow smoke at it, and I'll be like, yeah, it's a great hallway.
Yes,
What
I live in a
wonderful lighting
palace.
you have.
It's very common for us Canadians. Many of us live in palaces.
I mean, so I've heard. Speaking of, okay, Amanda's in Canada. You're in Toronto.
I'm in Toronto.
I'm here in the States in Portland, Oregon. This is our podcast. We're here. We're going to talk about the plant we love the most, or one of the plants we love the most, cannabis. We're going to do updates on the industry. We're here to just talk about dank herb and really the exploration of flavor, aroma, and effect of cannabis, because let's be real, not enough people are really diving into the sensory experience of cannabis. And when we just have words like fire and dank and bro to describe something, we're really doing it a disservice. So we're here to kind of expand our own vocabulary and relate to how other industries talk about these things. Cannabis is a billions-dollar industry, and there's really no set way to kind of talk about or communicate the values and the characteristics of this herb. So, hey, we're here to jam and talk about that stuff. And if you care about weed or smells or taste or any of those things, you're in the right place.
Yeah. I've been seeing a lot of TikTok videos going around, like, because my TikTok is really touchy about cannabis content. It is a no-go. As soon as you post a TikTok video, they will take it down for smoking or even having a freaking leaf in the background. Like, they're very strict about weed. So I really appreciate the content creators who are being so sneaky that they're still able to create cannabis content. But I've been seeing this trend lately of a lot of these cannabis creators really talking shit about terpenes. Trying to present it as like this sort of fad, this is the fad of cannabis. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately, especially whilst reading this book we're going to talk about today. But the idea that the smell of cannabis isn't going anywhere. It is not a fad. It is not temporary. It's not just something that's happening. It's not a flavor of the month thing. Cannabis has a smell, and in a big way, the smell is more of a distinction between different types and different strains than the flavor, and sometimes than the experience. Those things can sometimes be more subtle than the smell itself. So I've been thinking a lot about how important having these words and having these conversations about aroma are to the cannabis community, cannabis sommeliers, just general consumers. Like, that is the thing that distinguishes one from the other in the largest way in cannabis. Terpenes are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. And taking a step further, any brands that haven't started promoting their products with sensory language and these types of descriptions are really doing themselves a disservice, because again, it's not a fad. It's not going anywhere. It's important.
Absolutely, right. And in all of these other industries, craft beer, I think, is a really great example, right? Because you oftentimes, if you're walking into a bottle shop, you do not get to sample the wares. Everything's in a can. Nobody's going to open a can for you to try. That's just not how things work. So you're shopping with your eyes, cannabis in a lot of the same way. And that can be being attracted to a label or the artwork on a can, or even a brewery you like, right? So you're there. Now, are you just picking up the can and being like, I really love the art on this, I'm just going to buy it? Like, you at least need to know the style, right? To think, oh, okay, the difference between a stout and an IPA is huge, and I'm definitely more in the mood for one than the other. And then hopefully you can flip over the can and there's at least some sensory descriptors there that are like fruit from hops, tropical, piney, delicious, soft mouthfeel. Great. Hey, at least you gave me an idea of the experience I'm about to have. And it's a little bit of a bummer that we're not there with cannabis, or we're like slightly removed from that situation where you're walking in and maybe still attracted to the same artwork on the label, and then often that's as far as you can get, right? Or now you've stuck with the translation of a bud tender who maybe knows what they're talking about, maybe doesn't.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking about the idea of, like, if you go into a bar and you ask the bartender to make you what's your favorite, I'll have it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe what they give you, you're going to love. Maybe you're not. Like, it's totally up for grabs. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to like it. Maybe I'm not. For me, I know what I really dislike. So, in the beverage category, I hate pineapple. Anything with pineapple in it, I'm not going to like it. I don't like artificial pineapple or artificial banana. Like I like bananas, but pineapple, I'm like a little on the fence about. I do like it on pizza. Don't come for me. But in terms of flavor beverages, not a pineapple person. So if I see a tasty bevy and the can catches my eye and it doesn't let me know that there's some pineapple in there, I'm going to buy it. I'm going to drink it. I'm going to hate it. I'm going to have a horrible experience. In cannabis, for me, it's the cheeses. I'm really not a cheese fan. I don't like that taste. I don't like that stink. I'm definitely like fruity, grape, berry family. And that's why I kind of like that blues tend to be very popular. They're not so hard to find. And I also appreciate that cheeses tend to be labeled cheeses. So like in that way, I'm kind of lucky because the thing that I love and the thing that I hate are distinct enough categories that they're going to have some sort of hint in their name to what they are.
Right. And I almost feel sorry for the people who like the cookies profile is their absolute favorite because that profile, at least in the market, has been so watered down by making anything in the world by cookies. And also the fact that people recognize it as a name that sells. So they're more likely to put it on anything, whether it has that kind of like greasy motor oil bakery type funk that is, that good cookies profile. Hearing that you love the blues and those types of flavors and avoid cheese, I really wish I could share some of this blueberry streusel I got because it has such a crazy, almost like cloying blueberry muffin smell and taste to it. And so far from like the DJ Short blueberries that have like, like that blue smell, that kind of like vague berry bush type scent. This is just straight up like blue marker, scented blue marker, and it's a lot of fun. So we'll work out some tasting session in the future where you get to try that one.
That sounds really, really delicious and like something I would very much enjoy.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt. The seeds are from Kush Kirk here in Oregon. So if you're somebody that is really interested in trying to track down that profile, reach out to him or check out his page.
That sounds amazing. Maybe I'll have to hunt some down for next growing season.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I had some bad luck this year with my personal plants being all men. So it's been a rough summer having to chop them all down.
Yeah, I have a feeling that men ruined a lot of summers. So that's all right. I think that's a pretty typical experience that you've had.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So yeah, so we have exciting cannabis news in Canada today. There has been an ongoing strike in British Columbia that has caused a lot of chaos in the cannabis community. And today is kind of a big day because it's slowly coming to a close. So basically, this story begins, I have my notes here. The story begins in basically February. And so cannabis in Canada is run provincially. And so the provincial government of British Columbia oversees the wholesaling and all of the elements of having these legal dispensaries. And so the General Employees Union is cannabis workers are under their umbrella, but so is liquor, because liquor is also controlled provincially here. And so this union has over 33,000 members. And back in February, they were like, hey, the cost of living is too high. The inflation rate is too high. British Columbia is a very expensive province to live in. And they're like, hey, all of these service workers and provincial workers, like we need to account for this inflation at the bargaining table as we're talking about our future contracts. So jump ahead in April when the contract was up, they still hadn't come to any sort of agreement. And so they continued, the union continued to push for literally just the most basic thing, fair wages, nothing crazy, fair wages to match the cost of living. And there was pushback and pushback and pushback. And so about 3 weeks ago, what happened was they announced, we're going on a general strike. We're done arguing with you guys. It's general strike time, which I'm a union girl. So I was like, let's do it. But that was great. But unfortunately, the result of that unfolded very poorly for a lot of folks in the cannabis community, because what ended up happening was the workers decided to picket outside of wholesale distribution centers. And these are places where liquor and cannabis are distributed from. And so across the whole province of British Columbia, everyone from dispensaries to liquor stores, restaurants, anyone who's purchasing wholesale liquor or cannabis could not get shipments shipped. They were not receiving orders. Nothing was going out. And so for maybe like a liquor store, you might have a month worth of stock. You might have more. I don't know. I've never really worked behind the scenes at a liquor store, maybe a restaurant as well, a bar. You will have some stock because your liquor is not going bad. It's not going anywhere. But for cannabis retailers, they don't keep months of stock on site. It turns out that they're only keeping, 2-ish weeks worth of stock on site. And so this erupted in this whole situation where shops completely ran out of product.
Wow.
Across the province. And so the general strike started on August 15th. It went on for 2 weeks. And because of this unfolding and these wholesalers and all of the distribution issues, what ended up happening was more than 50 dispensaries closed and more than 500 cannabis workers are now unemployed. So more than 500 people lost their jobs in less than 2 weeks. Now, of course, this buildup was happening, but there's nothing that these dispensaries really could have done to prepare for it because they don't want old stock, which is really the only option is to stock up in advance. And they were only truly given 3 days notice, which is the legal amount in British Columbia to do a general strike. So 3 days isn't really much notice anyway. So yeah, hundreds of people lost their jobs, and it's been really hard to see that happening in an industry that's so new, to have mass layoffs like this.
Yeah, and I'm sure public perception of the problem wasn't helped by the strike. You know what I mean? Although it was helping people get better wages. I think it's a bummer to go and connect with a product and a shop and a bud tender, and you trust all three of these things, and then 2 weeks later they're gone, or some version of them is gone, and it's not coming back in that same way. Yeah, so I'm glad that it's resolved. I saw just even here in Oregon, just on social media, some of the effects of the strike, and it was wide reaching. A lot of shops had to close down. A lot of people had to come out and say like, hey, I was really loving my job managing this place and it's no longer here, so help me out, find me a new gig. Tough stuff.
It's tough stuff. And it's really kind of speaks to the infancy of the industry here as well, because if your shop closes, if all the dispensaries are struggling in your entire province, where do you go for work? Because if you, let's say, worked at a liquor store and your liquor store closed, maybe you could work at a restaurant, or maybe you could find a similar industry gig. But here, with the super strict regulations on what is legal and what is not legal, the only thing legal here are these dispensaries. So there's no smoking cafe or edibles restaurant, or there's no other opportunities for work other than retail if you want to be in the cannabis industry. And bud tenders work so hard to stay on top of trends and the best products. And really, I think there's some of the hardest working people in retail, really. Like, not to throw shade on anyone who works in, a clothing store, where you're also staying on top of trends. But here with cannabis, like, we cannot see the product. It is the bud tender's job to sell that product and make sure the customers are happy on a level that not a lot of other retailers ever experience. So yeah, it was pretty crazy. So after 2 weeks of striking, this chaos erupted. All these dispensaries are closed. I think the sad part was that during the pandemic, cannabis was considered an essential service. So we had very strict lockdowns here. Everything got shut down except dispensaries, liquor stores, and grocery stores and pharmacies, right? Like the essentials stayed open. And so for an industry to go from you're going to fucking jail, you're done, this is wrong, to being like, please stay open, we need you to get through this, you are essential to the, you know, the functioning of society, you are the last standing, you know, monument to the society we once knew, like, and now they're like, we don't want to pay you a living wage.
Right.
Tough shit. Now you're losing your job. Like, this is just like, it's really crazy.
Yeah, yeah, it really is, right? Especially since we have seen that there is some elasticity in the market as far as pricing is concerned. You know, when some of these states opened up, I'm seeing receipts from like Chicago or from Miami or just some dispensary in Florida, and it's like 160 US for like 2/8 or something like that. Like just prices that we would never pay, right?
No,
But
no,
okay, well,
no.
you get the novelty of going to a shop, it's a new industry, you're willing to like eat the cost on some of that. So people will pay much higher amounts for certain products and experiences. I'm not saying it needs to be $90 an eighth, but if the argument is that we can't pay workers a fair wage, like you can if you raise prices, and we have seen that the market will accept those prices, especially for the convenience of just walking into a store and just grabbing a thing, right?
Additionally, you know, the BC worker strike is their provincial employees. So the other thing here is like, cannabis is so highly taxed, and things like taxes go towards paying these types of things like salaries. So it's very shocking across the board that this high tax, and you are lucky because you live in Oregon, and I remember you guys don't have sales tax there. But you do have really high income tax, like it balances out through other taxes. But I do remember that being a perk of living in Oregon was when you go to the store, what it says on the shelf is what you pay, and then you leave.
Right, and that's huge. And I'm lucky enough to be a medical caregiver here, so I have the same cannabis is treated the same for me. For most rec users, I believe there's a 17% tax that's been applied. But you're right; those taxes are in place partly to support programs like worker assistance. You know, so I would expect that there should be more options available to this industry, which we obviously are saying, please don't go anywhere. This is very important. These products are very important to us. Um, you know, it's like if you look at edible sales just during, you know, the first year and a half of the pandemic or whatever, they jump up like 5 or 10 fold in some spots. Like when people realize, oh, this is hard being in my house all day, every day. And if I take a couple of edibles, I can zone out at night, or I can answer my emails in the afternoon, or I can just fucking sleep. Lifesaver, huge, right? And to not have access to those things, that's a huge bummer, right? And you have to wonder, like, what are people doing instead? And you know, I know that we were talking about this earlier. Some of the concern with the strike was that people were just going to go directly back to the black market. And
Yeah.
I think we know all of the reasons why that wouldn't happen, but you know, it is a possibility, right? And black market still exists, and in some cases is a better product or more in line with our values. So could be a good option anyway.
I understand the fear of the big bad black market coming back, getting all these hardworking dispensary owners and hardworking bud tenders. I get it. I do. But let's not forget, especially when we're talking about BC, where it all started. So for me,
Absolutely.
it was presenting, oh God, like everyone's going to go back to the black market. It's going to be the end of legal cannabis. Like, where are we going to get our customers again? It's like, well, you did it once. The black market has dwindled. Fortunately, unfortunately, depends on where you're at and where you get your money, you make your money from. But yeah, that it was a huge concern of people here was that they wouldn't be able to rejuvenate the legal market back to I guess where it was during the pandemic when sales were high because there was nowhere else to go and nothing else to do. So it's hard to say. And about a week ago, they ended the strike. They took a good pause. They were like, okay, let's come back. So after about 2 weeks, they're like, let's regroup, let's talk again. Now you know what it looks like when the workers strike. Let's talk about wages. And so they put a good faith pause. And as of today, they have fair wages and a few other things on the table in the works. They're crossing their T's, dotting their I's. And, what they're projecting is that dispensaries will be able to reopen, probably not all of them. So there will be losses. And that, the other big thing is catching up on the wholesale orders. How long is it going to take for them to be processing orders, shipping orders, plus everyone's asking for everything all at once. So now there's going to be a bit of a delay in getting shelves restocked and that sort of thing. And I think people will inevitably turn back to the black market to get what they need. But I think it's okay for us to coexist.
Absolutely, right?
A little of column A, a little of column B. I don't think it's the worst case scenario.
Right. And hey, I've got friends who are making like hash rosin, passion fruit syrup that you can pour over ice cream or mix into soda water, right? And have yourself a good time. They're not about to start a canning program to make 1,000 cans of their medicated passion fruit soda. That's just not going to happen. So it's like I can enjoy a little from column A or a little column B because some things are exactly how I want to spend my Saturday afternoon, and some things I'm just like on my way out the door on a Monday and need to grab a thing for whatever for my head.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I like the fizzy sodas so much, because that's really one thing I haven't quite mastered. If I want to make an infused cookie or an infused dinner, I got the oils, I got the hot sauce, I got the things that I need to make that happen, in like an hour, no problem. But the fizzies, I haven't quite mastered that one yet. So I'm like, okay, if I was in BC, I'd be in line, I'd be waiting for my soda, I'd be right there with everyone else. But maybe this will also inspire people to do the DIY and start, growing their own and taking a little more control over the situation. But also let's reflect on how crazy it is that businesses can fail like that. Just like that, so many businesses can go under. And I really think we're going to start to see a lot more of that, especially here in Toronto. I'm already seeing dispensaries closing big time. And it has nothing to do with product shortages. It has to do with too much product and too many dispensaries and chaos erupting. Every third shop is either a dispensary, a condo, or an A&W in this town. It's gotten ridiculous here. So if people do make the joke that Toronto is just those three things in a trench coat, because that's all.
Honestly, I'm like, this is a recipe for success for me over here. I'm like, I'll live in a condo if I can get a little snack here and some weed over here. I'm great.
Listen, that I can walk, less than 5 minutes and find any of those things faster than I can walk and find a banana. Do you know what I mean? Like bananas and groceries in my neighborhood than there are A&W Buddy Burgers and pre-roll. So it's a little crazy here at times, but maybe I think that's the world I wanted to live in a few years ago. So I'm not necessarily complaining.
I do also think it's funny. You're like, yes, we got it. And you're like, I can't eat candy for breakfast every day. It's like, okay. Yeah. Well, what have you been smoking on anything lately? Or you been enjoying anything specifically?
As I'm coughing. Yes.
That's all right.
What have I been enjoying lately? I'm back into the personal stash. I have some untrimmed flower from last harvest. I grow outdoor. on a small farm. And so we had some really nice strains last year. We had one that we did a few crosses of. It was a coffee and then a coffee crossed with cream, which I don't
Okay.
even know what to tell you about that, except that it was stunning, stunning. And the coffee was interesting because we had a few different seeds that we planted. And again, this is all outdoor, regenerative, sun grown. We're doing the whole nine. We even have a few like of those hugel beds going. Like we got this whole setup there that is just stunning. It's like the Garden of Eden. Anyway, so everything's kind of like that. And so sometimes things are different. You know, we grow from seeds, so you never really know what you're going to get. And so last year we had a few coffee plants. One was the greenest green that green could be when you think of the color green. That was it. It was green. And not a few feet away, same thing, same plant, same batch of seeds, purple, top to
Yes.
bottom, deep, deep, almost the leaves were almost black. Stunning purple. And you know, of course, the grower's delight, which is what we always called early mid-season when you get the pink, neon pink hairs.
Oh yeah, super fun. Yeah.
So we always called that grower's delight because it lasts for like a day and then it kind of fades out and you don't get to see it again. So those like neon pink hairs on these like purple, and then next to it a few feet is like the green, and it was like, what is happening here? So I've been working through a bag of that. I keep everything in Ziploc bags untrimmed.
Yeah.
So
Great.
I always have to
It's
make
called
it.
the candy wrappers for a reason, right? I like the leaves covering the buds, especially when it's all dry and like you have to peel them off. It for one, you know this, it helps preserve the flower itself. And so yeah, I feel like you're getting a better product if you're going to do some like longer term storage, as long as the moisture is not an issue to get it out. And then also it's a little bit more of a ritual to like break it down and trim it up just a little bit, just enough to kind of, you know, get those like bigger fan leaves or bigger sugar leaves off. Like, yeah, sounds good. Sounds tasty.
It's so chill. And I also I love trimming. I know no one likes trimming. I love the ritual. To me, that's the ritual. You know, I smoke all day. So I've lost a little bit of that ritual moment of rolling a joint. It's just become sort of part of the fabric of my day to day. So for me, trimming and sitting down, and I think 2 years ago, I finally bought my first trim bin. I've used them for years. You know, if you're a trimmer, you go to the farm, they're going to supply you with everything but scissors. So I've always had trim bins to work in, but I finally bought my own, so it's my nice little bin, and it's
If you
mine.
need
Yeah.
a bunch of keef, then yeah, you have like a sandcastles amount to play with, I'm sure.
So much to play with, of course. And my chica masas, you know, I'm a cheeky girl, so I have, you know, $10,000 worth of scissors. It's literally just, you know, 5 pairs, but they cost just way too much.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
gonna say for the uninformed, that is like the Mercedes Benz of trimming scissors. So
yeah.
that's wonderful.
You know, if
Keep
I
them
ever
clean.
got, if my house was broken into and they stole, you know, everything, I would run to the cupboard and see if my cheekies were still there because replacing those is like out of budget, you know?
Yes, yeah, that would be hard to replace too. You'd have to. We would start a GoFundMe for you to make sure you could get like a proper pair of trimming scissors.
Yeah, well, I like to have the whole selection. You know, they got the curved, the angled, the straight blade. They have the, you know, resin. Well, the ones that don't collect the resin. I'm a bit of a cheeky connoisseur. We haven't quite. I don't think we've ever talked about that, but I'm definitely a bit of a scissor snob when it comes to trimming scissors. So
You should be. I like that.
yeah. And what about yourself? Like, how's your any new flavors? You got this streusel going on?
The
Anything
blueberry
else?
streusel from Dow Gardens in Eugene. That was from Kush Kirk. I'm not sure if that was a clone. They do a lot of medium-sized pheno hunts there, so I have a feeling that was some seeds that they popped. For one, I'm saying that's amazing that you can get this crazy strong, pungent blueberry, artificial blueberry flavor from a seed, right? Usually, when something like Tropicana cookies is a perfect example. You get the Mountain Trop cut, which is like the breeder's cut. which is very specifically purple and super pretty and has this crazy orange nose. You can also get other Tropicana seeds from Oni that have a similar orange profile, but maybe not a 10 in the looks department and a 10 in the pungency department, and like really easy to trim. So I think it's cool anytime you're popping seeds and you get something worth saving, especially out of like a smaller run. That was really nice. And then last night I was smoking some dirty lemons from Urban Canna here, which is like a secret lemon and GMO cross. And to me,
Okay.
GMO and citrus don't always play well together. And this was definitely more on the like citrus leaning side of things than it was those like big, funky, garlicky type scents. So it was nice, but it's also not something I'd be like, go and find some immediately, like I would say for the blueberry streusel.
Nice. It's funny because I also picked up a garlic strain this week
Yes.
because harvest season is coming up. I got to go through what I got from last year. I got to, I think last week we talked about my cannabis hoarding tendencies.
Yes.
So I got to get through this stuff. And I found a bag of black garlic that I actually didn't know I had. And so that was cool.
No, wait, are you talking about actual black garlic? Or are you talking about the
It
wheat
is a
strain?
strain.
Yes, perfect.
It is a strain, not literal garlic mixed in with my weed. I am that responsible. I do keep my veggies in the crisper,
Hey,
my weed in the closet.
this is a pantry that I expect to be, mostly climate controlled and in the dark. So that's where I keep my garlic as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely just keep everything in a chicken sack in the closet. So it's just chilling in there. But yeah, I was going through, pulling out bags, and I also have a horrible tendency to not always close them. So just making sure everything was sealed up and just kind of scoping what I had left. The other thing is, a few things got seeded last year. I'm obviously very jaded towards male plants at this time, partly due to last year's trauma where a ton of stuff got seeded. And I love trimming. I hate trimming when it's full of seeds. There's nothing more disappointing. So I should have labeled the bags as to what was seeded and what wasn't, because I love having seeded cannabis to make infusions. Like when you have stunning buds, of course you want to smoke them, but like, why not make a delicious infusion without shake, trim? A lot of the products that I make from whole flower. And I work with the stuff that's really seeded. So I was looking at the black garlic, and it's this beautiful, almost gray. Like it had this like gray tone to it.
That's cool.
Just the way the green and the purple came together, and just big chunky buds, these nice little, it's like some nice little fox, like it was just so pretty. And I started picking through that as well. And it's funny because I'm not a big fan of the garlic strains, and I think that's why I forgot it was there.
Oh, sure. You weren't like super excited to get into it. So just kind of, oh, that's in the bag. Yeah.
Anything I was excited to get into is long gone in September
Yeah,
following
I'm
year.
with you.
We're
with
down
you there.
to dregs of things,
Yeah.
But it's, I have a lot of pothead friends, and I love sharing weed with my friends. And so luckily we have opposite palates. So that's, always look for friends with the opposite palate when you breed strains. So you can take the fruities, they can take the cheesy garlics, and tell you how delicious it is, and you don't have to smoke it yourself. So
Yes.
it's nice going through some of that stuff this week, and I'll have to bring some out. This is a video podcast, and I don't think we've brought any actual flower on yet.
No, we were like, okay, let's hold off from just smoking into the camera for at least the first few episodes. So I'm kind of happy with that there. Anytime anyone's holding buds up to the camera,
Oh yeah.
anyone who's watching the video, it's like a whole thing. You're like trying to get the camera not to zoom in on it. I feel like we do a better job describing it. Seeded cannabis is one of those things like, yes, put it to good use, because I don't want to smoke it. I'll never forget. I was with a grower, and he's like, "Yeah, this whole crop got seeded, and he's like, yeah, it was Gorilla Glue, which is a personal favorite of mine. No, it was G13 hash plant, which I love, seeded by Gorilla Glue. And he was like, yeah, let's smoke a joint of this just to see. And we rolled it up. It had micro seeds in it, right? So like the
Oh,
seeds were not developed, and this is the worst because you don't always see it, but man, you can taste it. It is the worst, and you'll get the like popping of the seeds exploding, and it has this kind of like rancid oil fattiness that is just totally undesirable. And I'm bringing this up with such like ugh, in my mouth because in the last week I bought some flour. It was like one of my places I don't normally go is a farm. I was like, okay, I'll try those guys. Brought it home, ground it up. Didn't notice any of the like telltale little white seed marks, and started smoking it, and just could immediately taste it. And yeah, I'll never forget the guy with the Gorilla Glue seeded weed said, "You can just taste the bean meat." And so anytime I'm like, bean meat, like that is the
ah,
flavor, and it just reminds me of like it really does taste like trying to smoke a bean, which is sounds about as good as it is. So yeah, such a bummer. I'm glad that somebody was like, hey, wait a minute, there are seeds in here, whether the seeds are going to get put to good use or not, the flower can be. And you're like, yeah, let me add it, right?
yeah, for sure. And I mean, of course, I'll pick out the seeds depending on the strains. We actually do have some 88s, an 88 G13 strain
Ooh,
that we grow. That's one of our
ooh,
super hardy home strains that we crossed with a lot of interesting things because it's very resilient to our environment here. So G13 is one we cross a lot with like an Afghan hash plant, actually, that's like an
cool,
super OG old seed, old phenotype that the master growers really kept like growing over the years to
awesome.
keep that going. So we have some really nice crosses of that. And we do save seeds, but when you have, a lot, it's tough. And also you never know what you're gonna get. And this year, of course, I've grown from seeds for many years. And this year was the year where I got burned. And now, this is people always pay extra for feminized seeds or they go for the clones. And I never really thought too much of it because I never really had more than one or two that
Mhm.
plants that I started from seed that were issues. But this year, having all of them being males, I'm like, I get it now. I understand now why people do what they do when it comes to that because you just never know. I guess I've just been lucky until
Right. And
today.
I mean, I think that there are some concerns that there's like less genetic diversity in feminized plants, and that's probably true. But just anecdotally, from what I've seen popped from feminized seeds, like I'm always just as impressed with those plants that don't require as close of an eye to make sure you're not getting a male. So to me, it seems like, a worthwhile avenue for folks who really don't want to like go in there and cull males months at a time.
Yeah, checks out.
Well, hey, speaking of checks out, I checked this book out of the library,
Okay,
and I
local
think
library shout out.
right, we're here. This is a great book, and if you're here listening to this podcast and you've made it this far, just go pick this one up. Just add it to your library list because it's just as worthwhile to flip through as it is to like sit down and read. So yeah, it's Nosedive by Harold McGee. It's a field guide to the world's smells. Um, if you're unfamiliar, I'm trying to see if I have his other book here. Um, Harold McGee wrote a wonderful food book, which I have to like quickly Google search because the name escapes me. It's called On Food and Cooking, and it is basically like the headiest cooking primer you could ever get into, where he's like talking about the Maillard reaction, and this is what heat does to food, and this is what salt does to food, and this is what braising does to food. It's very like, let's look at the science behind cooking and see how we can apply that as a home cook, as a restaurant cook, as somebody who's like scale making, I don't know, 100,000 pounds of bacon a year, or whatever industrial food processes you can think of. So Harold McGee finished that book. All the nerds like ourselves loved it. And so his publisher approached him and said, "What's next?" And he said, "Well, reading so much about food has me thinking a lot about flavor, right? So I'd like to write a book about flavor." And they said, "Great, you should." And he said, "Well, give me 2 years to write this." And they said, "No problem." And it took him 10 years to put the book together.
Okay, I seriously thought you were gonna say it took 2. I was like, who, where, how? Okay, 10 years. Yeah, this is serious.
Oh, it's huge. It's an encyclopedia of smells, literally.
Yeah.
And that's what it turned into. And I guess, like, to the chagrin of his publisher, he just kept pushing it back and pushing it back until finally it's not done. Something like this is never going to be done, but it is ready to be out there, or he was ready to be done with it. And so neither of us have finished this like cover to cover. And maybe I won't, although I absolutely could. My version is like well over 600 pages. The index is like fun itself to flip through, because this is essentially like a little bit of an intro and then an encyclopedia on what smells are, how they work, what's coming from what. He said one of the inspirations for the book was the smell of flowers and the smell of leather, right? Those two things, they're not similar. In fact, they have very different origins. And so he's going to dive into what makes these smells different. So like chapter 4 is about animal bodies and the smells they create, right? And he calls out very specifically the molecules that are contributing to these aromas. So before I just keep talking, why don't you tell me some of the things that caught your attention when you were flipping through?
Well, you're right, because you and I have shared book reports in the past, and we've always managed to read the book. So I was actually like, oh man, if Ryan actually read this whole book, like I'm gonna be like, I just got through the beginning, because there's a lot there. And like you said, you can kind of flip through it and just find your little sections, or you could really dive deep. But Harold McGee is a total smell freak. He's totally on our level.
The alternate, this could just be called Total Smell Freak.
Yeah.
And I would be like, yeah, great. Yeah, I'll grab a copy of that as well.
He just sucks you right in from the beginning. I'm a big fan of reading the intro and the preface and all the things. I like to know where we're starting from before we start. So I really got deep into that whole section. I just could not stop reading, because he starts very, very gently talking about foods and eating quail. And it very quickly escalates to the smell of his own burning flesh on his tongue and what that tasted like. And it was like, bro, that escalated really quickly. Okay, rose and leather. Yeah, but how about like quail and your own flesh? Like what? So he really goes there with this book. And I liked that it starts by talking about, I actually wrote it down, that when we smell another person's body, it's like a part of their body is entering us and entering our body, because it's vapor and airborne molecules temporarily become a part of ourselves. Terrifying. It's beautiful, but it's horrifying.
No,
But
now I want to be around people I don't like even less, right?
And he akins it to when you have a bad smell and you hold your breath, you don't want it to be a part of you. And I'm like, that actually is a really very poetic way of looking at a bad smell. It's your body's reaction is perhaps to not let it enter, not just because it's sensorially disturbing at the time, but also because your body's like, I don't want that. No, thank you. So he really describes smell in an interesting way. I also like throughout the book how he's sort of what he calls an amateur chemist, because he's not trained as a sensory expert in any way. He's self-taught. He just found this fascinating and really just took a nosedive into the world of smells. And so he has all these fun phrases like a scent explorer and cosmonauts, and like he just has really funny ways of describing people like ourselves who are just really obsessed with smell and how smell works and what it does and what it feels like. And he really breaks that down in visually in with those his column system that he uses, where he picks one smell, names the thing, and then he writes his own personal descriptions of them, and kind of takes a nod to the fact that we all have noses, but we're not always using them in the way where we're understanding and breaking down the things around us. Because it's easy to smell a rose. Maybe that's a tough one. It's easy to smell, let's say, something cooking, like a turkey, Thanksgiving, like Thanksgiving, and your nose will smell that thing and identify the thing as being Thanksgiving lunch. But the idea is to train your nose to understand the nuances and what it is bringing that together, because your brain will just put a name to the thing without you ever having to break it down and understand what its layers are. So I really like that he inspires to take the time to try to unravel what all of these different aromatic mysteries can be.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really super important to kind of look at these things in these different ways. One of the things that he dives into is that we always think of flavor as happening in the mouth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, flavor is smell, it's taste, it's texture, it's perception, right? So when you are eating that Thanksgiving, like everything is there, nostalgia is there, all of your memories are there. You're not going, oh, do I detect a hint of sage, unless you take the time to do that, right? And so though we think of flavor as like smelling a rose is very much a smell that's happening in your nose, great. Eating something isn't just your tongue going, great, I know what this is. It's your whole brain trying to decipher what's in your mouth. And really that whole system exists to like gauge our nutrition in a way, right? And so and we've used this system to like help us decide if someone is like a worthwhile partner or not. Like smell has become so much more than just like your tongue slapping up against a food. And this helps dive into all of the ways we kind of take it for granted, and then the ways we can be much more specific about what we're smelling or tasting or experiencing in a way that, hey, could aid in our communicating about it.
And I liked that in the intro, he talks about the fact that exactly this doesn't come naturally. So
Right.
it's not something we naturally do. We need to really take the time and have the patience with ourselves to uncover these things, because our bodies naturally just want to sum things up and sort of move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And then you were talking earlier about not loving garlic smells, right? Or that not being like your favorite kind of cannabis, right? Even if you love a piece of garlic bread, that's not the cannabis that you're going to gravitate toward,
I'm
right?
not a monster. Of course, I love garlic bread,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, I think even people who can't eat garlic bread are like, I really wish I could eat that garlic bread. Um, but these garlicky scents, these like sulfur compounds, which we'll get into an episode later, we know are present in cannabis. These thiols are also present in garlic. McGee shows how like the rare ingredient like alcohol, which you can actually absorb in your mouth into your bloodstream, garlic works that same way. You're actually absorbing these sulfur compounds into your bloodstream through your mouth, in your mouth. And that's one of the reasons why, if you're brushing your teeth 6 times after you eat a piece of garlic bread or smoke on this really thiol rich cannabis, um, you still smell like it. That is absorbed into your body at that point, and you're ingesting it. So all the toothpaste in the world isn't going to clear that out of your bloodstream. And probably for the best, because there are, we've seen medicinal benefits in these kind of compounds. And if we're talking about cannabis, an effect. I have not even gotten a chance to dig into if McGee touches on weed or cannabis at all.
Okay,
Um,
so I went ahead and jumped to the index.
yes, please.
You know, because again, I really thought you've read the whole book. I don't know how fast you read, but I didn't get to very much.
I like zoomed through the like YouTube Google talk of Harold McGee, and I'm like, okay, good. I think I have enough to talk about on the podcast.
Yeah, well, I think it's just a testament to how juicy this work is because
Yes.
you and I regularly read these types of books for fun. So it's, you know, you really want to take your time going through it. I jumped to the index, which does have the word cannabis. And so he does have a few sections where he talks about terpenes and terpenoids, and he does break it down in the greenery and grass section, talking about well, really, he starts to go into like some of our favorite terpenes, myrcene, beta caryophyllene. He talks a little bit about linalool. And what I found interesting were actually his observations on what those aromatics smelled like. Because, you know, I read a lot about these smells, and obviously we both work with terpenes directly. We smell them all the time. And you know, he had a really interesting point on linalool, which I believe he pronounces linalool based on what that little section of that book was. And that it is, we think lavender, but it's actually less floral and more crisp. And it led me to wonder if I've been letting personal influences or personal impressions influence some of the things I thought I knew a little too heavily, or perhaps if we're just smelling things differently. And he also kind of touches on that in his book, because ultimately our idea when you smell something and identify it is based on memory and based on personal experience of those aromas. And so his personal experience of a smell will differ from mine, obviously. And so, but I thought that was really interesting. He presented it as more of a crispness than this. Most people would describe it as, you know, more of a floral leaning. He just considered it a lighter note. And didn't give too much. And then he also briefly touches on farnesene, which I thought was interesting because that's our apple peel aroma, which I've always said is very light, almost imperceptible in my experience of smelling that terpene in isolation. I haven't found it to be really heavy, but he talks about the smell of an apple orchard and the smell of the peels coming off of the trees, off of the apple, hanging from the tree. And it framed the apple smell very differently in my mind. So the idea of just going to your grocery store, buying an apple, bringing it home and smelling it and being like, I don't smell anything, is completely different sensory experience than going to an orchard and just smelling the air.
Right. And
That's
there's 10,000 apples in the sun, right? Yeah. Yeah. Totally
exactly.
different. Well, also really interesting because I associate farnesene as almost a hemp terpene, right? Like that's where I see it a lot. And so in commercial cannabis, if I'm looking at a terpene test result and I see a lot of farnesene, I don't have the flower in front of me. A lot of times I'm like, that one might not be for me. That one might have more of a generic hemp smell. And so that's not a super attractive terpene for me when I'm looking at it in that way, right? Now, I love the smell of apples, and growing up in cherry and apple orchards, I have a feeling that putting me right back in that spot, I would be like, oh, this is one of my smells of my childhood. And I really do like this. And when I do find some sour apple alien kush or whatever that does have a little bit of that like manzana soda aroma to it. Like, I love that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that I'm showing my own prejudice here by associating a certain compound with a less desirable smoking experience. And there's a very good chance that I am just putting that on myself. And I would probably really like some of these farnesene dominant cultivars if I just found the right concentration.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, really, this book was really got me thinking a lot, even just about our perception of aroma. Obviously we've talked a lot about how terpenes work in the body, how we experience smells day to day, the experience of a sniff. Like, we've talked a lot about, this science stuff, which he really brings up in his book, but in this from a very different perspective than I've seen so far when it comes to smell. So I really appreciated that about this book as well. One of the things he touches on, which probably comes from his flavor background, is that I'm probably going to butcher the story because obviously I'm paraphrasing here, but
everyone who's listening to this is going to get the book and read every single page. So by all means, yeah, this is just, hey, by the way.
So he has this section where he's talking about, I think I want to say it's in the intro because I really committed to that, but he was talking about ants having a smell that's kind of like a gingery lemongrass. And so in the story he's telling, and then this way he's describing that when he first tried it, it just reminded him of that. And so to him, he would say ants taste like a lemony ginger grass. Now, he had a friend come visit him from a region who eats ants as part of their cuisine. He made them a delicious, fancy, Thai infused type of soup using lemon and ginger, lemongrass and ginger. And to them, they just thought, tastes like ants.
Yes.
And this is part of this perspective shift when we're thinking about aroma, where I was like, of course, it makes sense. And you're going to base your experiences off of your opinions off of your experiences of these aromas. So that's another really good example where he puts that out there, and how heavily our day-to-day experiences with aroma completely influence how we perceive them. And so as cannabis connoisseurs and sommeliers of aroma, that's really something to think about quite deeply, I think, because our opinions matter, but they're coming from a very particular place, our own experiences.
Yeah, well, and I think it's really interesting. We talk about communication a lot because I want to be able to call my friend in Japan who has an entirely different cuisine, who has entirely different flavor references, and be able to have a conversation with them where we're talking about coffee or cannabis or beer or even Kool-Aid, and say like, hey, this is my experience with it. And I at least want to communicate that with you. So maybe we can order the same coffee beans from a roaster in Eugene, Oregon, right? Or maybe in the future, they're arranging for 50 pounds of my neon blue dream. And if it's going to be shipped all the way to Japan, then we need to know like very specifically what we're getting here, right? And so I can share a terpene test with them. I can share all of the images in the world. But without someone like us to kind of translate what those compounds together actually turn into, or the experience you can expect, we need to have these kind of like touch points that we can all agree on.
Yeah. I just have so many thoughts right now. One, Thailand actually just legalized, reintroduced. Did you see that on the news this week?
Yeah. I've been dealing with Thailand at work too. So yeah, it's worth talking about.
So they just brought it back in. And the thing is, it's not that they're not smoking it. When they made cannabis illegal there, it was partially due to America's unjust war on drugs, but they actually use it a lot in their cooking. It is part of their cuisine, not to get high, but they use the roots and the stalks and different shoots and different things in their soups and their stews. It was a very common thing that people were cooking with. So that's another moment of like, oh, this whole thing is coming full circle again. We're talking about now this flavor of cannabis is coming into play as well here. Secondly, completely two ends of the spectrum here, but I don't want to forget this. One of the other things that McGee talks about is about he lists his perception of the aroma. He lists the chemical compounds that create that aroma. So he's going for the molecular science, the sensory experience. And he talks about how the names that chemists give smells are confusing at first, but once you start using them and meeting them and getting their names to their smells and getting to know them better, they start to stick. So we're starting to be able to use these scientific chemistry-based terms with everyone. People are starting to pick them up. But he also took it a step further to say, you know, a beer lover can maybe go into long conversations about esters, and cannabis connoisseurs can go into long conversations about terpenes. And of course, craft perfumers can talk about aldehydes. And we can all have these very intense scientific conversations about all these things. But at the end of the day, there does need to be a little bit more of a translation for everyone who's not in that nerd circle.
Right. I think phenylacetaldehydes
Like,
are like a harder sell than like I think you're really gonna love how grassy this is. You know, it's I the common language. You know, I think that there's several tiers of it, right? And I think that's kind of fun because earlier you were talking about like artificial pineapple bums you out, and I would bet so does artificial strawberry flavors, right?
this is true.
Because surprisingly, pineapple and strawberries share a lot of the same aroma compounds. Mind blowing. Also, when we talk about skeletons or structure here on scents, that's how these scents are built. Or you know, so you have the skeleton of a strawberry scent, and so you're building this with different molecules and different concentrations, and so you can smell it and say like, okay, it's getting a little closer to what an actual strawberry smells like. But these two flavors are so complex, we can't really agree on what the flavor structure or skeleton should be. And so, artificial pineapple, you get all kinds of weird shit. And same thing with artificial strawberry. Like I've got some scents here, and my daughter likes to smell them like mystery smell. Oh, that's you know a blueberry hydrosol or whatever. It's great training her nose.
Love it.
But the artificial strawberry and pineapple flavors always throw them for a loop because it's not quite right. And it's convincing enough that if you're eating a pink gummy and it's in the shape of a strawberry, you go, oh yeah, that's pretty close. But just blindfolded, bottle in front of your nose, sweet, watermelon maybe. Like it's not close enough to the actual thing for us for our brains to light up and go, I know what that is.
Well, you know, when I eat an orange popsicle, it's not because it tastes like oranges. I just like orange flavor, the color
Totally.
orange. You know, I like the
Yes.
flavor, and I like
Yes.
the flavor. So that definitely checks out. Was there any other parts of the book that like really stood out to you that you got to?
No, but I am going to be dangerously boring at parties for like the next month or so because people will be like, "Oh yeah, we just got back from Disney World," and I'll be like, "Did you know Disney World has a very specific scent that is made by the Scent Producers of America up in Chicago, Illinois? That's 80% coconut and 20% suntan lotion." And they'll say, I really couldn't care less. And I'll say, I can't help talking about these things because that's what all these things are like little factoids. It's like, oh, you really love the smell of a mandarin? Well, you probably love the smell of its two parent fruits, like a Persian lime and whatever kind of orange. These two were bred together. These are the scent components of the two fruit parents. This is the scent components of a mandarin and why it's unique, and then we just move on to talking about something else, and that's like perfect for my brain to just like hop in and learn a little bit that's like part story, part scent exploration, and then part the science behind it all. That makes this like way dangerous for me because now I mean you can get into everything. I'm reading about bananas, I'm reading about milk, I'm reading about farts. Like it's all in here, and all of it is way more interesting than it has any right to be.
Yeah. And it's funny because like thinking about citruses, thinking about limes, lime is something I actually use in a lot of my presentations because limes smell so different. And of course, you can say something like, the rind versus the fruit, sure, whatever. That's obvious, but let's take it a step further. We can go with like a Mexican lime. We can go with a Moroccan lime. We can go with a key lime. Key lime is your super sweet, disgustingly sweet lime. And then you can just go with like, there's just all these different limes, for example, and they're
Yeah.
all going to present so differently when it comes to aromatics. And so, training your nose to still see, oh yeah, that is still lime, but it's the sweeter, like key lime, out of context might not hit lime right away. It might not tag you in lime unless you're very familiar with lime candies, maybe, like unless you have that scent memory to start to bring these pieces together. All these different things have their different aroma profiles.
Right. And I mean, I'll just throw it back to our last episode. The Demeter, the scent company that makes all of these scents that are like Play-Doh and fresh cut grass and dirt. Like I said on the last episode, their disclaimer that our dirt is not your dirt. It probably smells differently. It just goes for all of these things, right? The pistachios that were being grown in Turkey for baklava production. McGee noticed that the baklava was so much bigger and fresher and more rich in pistachio flavor than just the California pistachios he was used to like cracking like right in front of the tree even, right? And found out that these Turkish pistachios are picked at a much younger state, and they have 2 to 10 times the aroma compounds of the like mature California pistachios that are likely grown to that size just because it's cheaper to produce. And I think that's kind of like the fascinating note we'll leave on here, is that not only do these things change from region, from terroir, from the cultivar, all the way down to like the harvest date, right? And the cool thing is we can apply all of this to cannabis. And so it is why this is such like a ripe subject for us to dive into, because it's such a volatile plant in all of the ways that your experience is not my experience. Tuesday is different than Sunday. And if you're like a nerd like me, those things are like fun to talk about.
Same. I'm actually really excited because this weekend I'm going to the Grow Up conference, and
Yes, talk to us about that.
I really don't like going to conferences, and I'm not as social as I used to be. I don't drink anymore, so these night mixers just are kind of a little bit nightmarish for me. And I'm going solo, so I don't even have like a buddy systems. You go to a party and you don't know anyone, and you're just like trying to find your people. So I'm hoping to find my people. I'm going in full confidence. I know I'm gonna find the terp nerds. Like I'm gonna sniff them out, and get in there. And yeah, I'm gonna be sitting on a panel where we're gonna be talking about this. The importance of LPs doing sensory profiling, tasting and testing of aroma and flavor for their consumers on behalf of their brand. So it's going to be kind of on the importance of smelling, tasting, and testing your product in this market, and that's where the value is, in my opinion. So
awesome. I can't think of a better person to have up there. So this will be coming out probably after you come back. First episode should be out there. So if you're listening to this, just know like Amanda kicks some ass and you're going to have to show up to the next one.
I'll give you guys a full update, 100%. I'll let you know how it goes. I think it's going to be fun. And we were talking about this a little earlier, but what's nice about this particular conference, it is somewhat corporate. There's going to be a lot of brands there. There's going to be a lot of big names, very commercial, but they're also bringing in like Frenchies, hash making style. There's like a huge hash component. And I do understand a lot of brands are putting hash on the market right now, but they're leaving room for small scale producers home producers, hobbyists. So I'm actually really looking forward to that aspect where they've brought in the corporate side of things and, you know, the whole legal industry. And then they're also keeping lots of room for people still doing their own thing to come together without fear and to talk about what they're growing, how their hash is coming along, you know. So there's a nice black market component to this, and I think this is a pretty ideal scenario, hopefully, of like industry professionals and enthusiasts.
Yeah, and I think that's so cool, especially since from, with some exceptions like Blue River, most of the like revolutions in hash are happening on the like home scale, home grower level, right? And I think that that dictates all of the textures and production techniques that are available like on the retail market. And it is very cool to see things like them teaching Frenchies techniques, where it's kind of like old world meets new school. These pressed hashes that we don't see on shelves, partly because they're not super stable. They don't hold very well. So those are the kind of like things that you can only experience when someone is like taking the care and time to put into it, which we often don't see at the retail level. Very cool. Sounds like something that's totally worthwhile, and like something we haven't seen in Oregon for a few years now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really great. And I'm going to be sitting in at a growers luncheon, which I'm also really looking forward to. You know, it was sort of an invite only, and I didn't actually think I was going to get invited because it's geared towards licensed producers, of which I am not. But I'm very curious to hear what they have to say, because a lot of it's going to be around the regulations and stuff that are happening. It's going to be a conference for weed nerds. I'm going to sit in on all the groups, all the panels. Like, this is kind of my jam. So I'm just going to bring a pen and paper and just nerd out. There's a panel happening on tourism, cannabis tourism, which is something I'm very, very passionate about. And I'm hoping that they're going to touch on some of the things we talked about earlier, like, where are the other jobs in the industry outside of dispensaries? Like, how can a place like British Columbia, so globally renowned for its cannabis, have only retail jobs? And where's the fun? Where are the fun things? So I'm really hoping that when I go to these things, I'm looking for innovation. I'm looking for new ideas. And I'm really hoping this being a nice culmination of gray market and green market, I think it's going to be really solid. So here's hoping, and it's a good one. And I will fully report back on all of my findings.
I was going to say you're going to have to.
Yeah.
So we have been bashing these episodes. We have a few to drop at once. So we've been putting the call out there to hear your favorite smoke spots, right? Past, present, hey, future. We want to hear like where you're toking up and enjoying yourself, right? And because I don't have one in the queue, I'm going to share my own personal story. And being a teenager trying to find somewhere to just smoke weed and not get bothered in an illegal state, we found a few places that could consistently be a good smoke spot throughout the years. And when you find a good one, it stays. So dozens of times I went up to Chain Road. Chain Road was a back roads that you could drive on there in my small Michigan city. And there was a road that was chained up. And what had happened was someone purchased this property. They built a cul-de-sac. They started building a small subdivision. And then I don't know what happened. The permits fell through, or they ran out of money, or who knows what. But this cul-de-sac was just back there chained up for most of my youth. And we would pull up, disconnect the chain, drive through, someone would chain it back up, and then we could just cruise back up there out of sight. We had this whole little cul-de-sac to ourselves. In my teenage brain, no one could hear us, but knowing now that how far sound carries, I'm sure the neighbors were like, those damn kids are smoking on the cul-de-sac again. But yeah, that remained one of the like few safe spots to go and smoke and chill for a couple of years at least. And I might do some Google Map searching later to see what is there now, because I could probably navigate there with like one eye closed at this point. I remember so fondly where it was. Um, that's my smoking spot. If you have one that, like, puts a little smile on your face, email us, call us. We love the voicemail messages we've been receiving on our Instagram. Please do that. You can find me at the Loud 100. Amanda, where can we find you?
Yeah, my Instagram is at emerald.templeliving. And I've been getting a few really good ones. I just want to say that it was called Chain Road because you opened a chain to get to that road. You guys called it Chain Road.
Oh, yes. There was no name of this road. We were just like Chain Road. Yes.
I think that's like one of the a key moment of youth and smoking and having your smoking spots is coming up with those names for the spots.
Oh, yeah. If it doesn't have a name, I mean, was it even a spot? Yeah, seriously.
Exactly.
You'll have
But
to call in and let us know.
I've been loving what everyone's been sending me. So yeah, keep sending them on Instagram. And yeah, I think we'll have all these episodes up soon.
Yeah. Hey, we're done batching at this point. So the episodes are hitting the airwaves. And if you're hearing this, like, thank you for subscribing. Please, like, leave reviews or pass it on to a friend. We know cannabis stuff does not spread as word of mouth as it used to because of all of these fun silos that are being placed on everything. So we need your help. Spread the word, and join us next week where we're going to be nerding out about more stuff, and probably we'll still be talking about Harold McGee.
Yeah, I hope so, because we got a lot more reading to do. Again, just in case anyone didn't catch it, it is called Nosedive, and both of us got it at our public libraries.
Yeah, apparently there's not so many like nerds clamoring for this one that it was hard to get.
Yeah.
So,
And I
yeah.
give a big thanks to our friend Gator Troubadour,
Always.
Bandcamp, who wrote our super cool intro and outro song. And thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Yeah, here's a little outro now, and if you dig it, go look them up.
Oh, smoke it up, hold it down, and don't ever stop. Well, you can always find your smoking spot. Yeah, you can always find a smoking spot.